Hello, everyone. Welcome to the KJH Insights podcast. I'm Sarah Bull, managing partner at KJ Harrison Investors. Thank you for joining us. Today's episode is part of our Women in Wealth series, where we explore financial topics that we believe matter most to women through all of their life stages in transition. This show really aims to educate and inspire women to make wise decisions around their wealth. And I'm really pleased to be joined today by Corina Weigl, partner at Faskins, one of Canada's leading experts in estate planning. So today's episode is about estate planning, an area that can feel complex or even uncomfortable, but one that's absolutely essential for protecting what matters most. And together with Corina, we're going to unpack the unique considerations women face when it comes to estate planning, whether that's longevity and caregiving or blended families and legacy planning. So our goal today is to provide you with practical advice on how to take a proactive and empowered approach around your estate. So Corina, let's dive in. Can you give us a brief review of your focus area and what you do every day?
I certainly can. Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to join all of you today with Sarah to talk about a subject that's not only crucial, as Sarah has said, but also empowering, estate planning. And it's obviously one that's near and dear to my heart. So my role really is to guide individuals and families in organizing their affairs so that their assets are transferred according to their wishes, while also ensuring tax and administrative efficiency. Nobody wants to pay more tax than they need to. But I also always try to focus the discussions in a way that will reduce the potential for family conflicts or disputes at the end of the day. And so when I look at an estate plan, I think of it as having two core elements and then a bunch of other pieces that work their way into those elements. So the first core element to a solid estate plan is a will. And that really is essential because it outlines how your assets will be distributed after your death. Without a will, your estate may not be distributed as you wish. Instead, it will be distributed according to legislation, which could lead to unnecessary complications. It will inevitably lead to more taxes being payable, and it could also have the potential to lead to conflicts amongst family members. And if you've got minor children, it may lead to a scenario where your voice as to who should be their guardians isn't heard because you haven't appointed anybody pursuant to a will. The flip side to the estate planning process is what happens if you become incapable before you die. And that's where powers of attorney come in. That's the second key document that forms part of our estate planning practice. Those are documents that are really intended to designate someone to make decisions on your behalf if you become incapacitated. That document can cover financial matters, healthcare matters, or both. And having a valid power of attorney in place ensures that someone you trust is looking out for your interests if you're unable to do so yourself. Because of that, it can be a huge responsibility depending upon how long you are incapable prior to your death and what the nature of your incapacity is. So it's really, really critical to think carefully about who you're going to appoint. The last two things that I want to refer to is if you are involved in a family enterprise, things get a little bit more complex where there will be other tools in your planner's toolbox besides wills and powers of attorneys. Here, when I work with family enterprises, I work to help families structure the ownership and governance of their businesses, whether that encompasses investment holding companies, operating businesses, or often family trusts. So my role is to help structure the ownership and governance in a way that acknowledges the distinct but interconnected roles of the family, the owners, and the business itself. This often involves creating governance plans that respect the family's values, while also managing family expectations about cash flow distributions and ensuring the business can thrive across generations. In essence, planning is about peace of mind, Sarah. It's about knowing that your wishes will be honored, your loved ones will be cared for, and your legacy will endure, as you referred to in your opening comments. Whether that's through wills, trusts, powers of attorney, and family and governance strategies, the goal ultimately, in my view, and what I try to help facilitate clients do, is create a plan that reflects their unique situation and what their aspirations are.
I think that's a really, really great, clear, and thoughtful overview. So thank you. And I really like how you talked about not only the will, but the powers of attorney, because I think oftentimes people don't realize how important those documents are as well, and how really it's almost three separate parts, three separate components, as you said, that make up the estate plan. So, given everything that you just said, and we'll talk about the unique challenges women face when it comes to estate planning, but given everything that you just said, where do people typically start? Because sometimes estate planning can really seem overwhelming and it's easy to procrastinate.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really, really good question. So, the way I look at starting it, and there's sort of two aspects to planning, because I know we should all be focused on our own affairs, but often, particularly women, which is the topic we're focusing on today, they often have to step into thinking about their parents' affairs as well. And if there are women on the podcast who have minor children or even young adults, the initiating the conversation becomes somewhat challenging. But really, it is, you've got to initiate the conversation. And so when I focus on having this discussion with clients who may be taking on roles vis-a-vis their parents, I start by framing the discussion around something like, I've been thinking about your future mom and dad, and I know, you're getting older and I'm getting older. I think it would really help ease all of our burdens if I have a sense that your affairs are in order, because, it may be me who needs to step in to take over, or maybe me and my sister Susie or my brother Johnny who needs to step in and take over. And so perhaps we could all sit down together and hear from you, mom and dad, what you're planning, and so that everybody's on the same page. So you really just need to start by asking the question of your parents. The other side of the coin in terms of how to start the process is looking at your own affairs. And I know I tried to simplify the estate planning process in my earlier comments, but the reality is there is complexity to that process. And this is where having a team of trusted advisors sitting alongside you is going to help you. These should be advisors that you can connect with and who care about you and the ultimate outcome, because that's what's going to make all the difference. I know, Sarah, you and I have talked about this in the past, and you and I are both, we've been at this a long time. I think we're both good at what we do, but I think one of the things that differentiates us is we actually care about the outcome for our clients, and I think that's critical to clients. So consider assembling that dream team. And who do I think should be part of that dream team for your estate planning process? A financial advisor like Sarah, somebody can help on the investment side, obviously a solid and estate lawyer, and then a tax person or an accountant. There may be other key advisors for your team depending on your situation, such as an insurance specialist or a family succession advisor. But ultimately, that team needs to work collaboratively together. In my view, there can't be really any room for egos or ownership of clients, because the best outcomes come with people collaborating. As this team is intended to be alongside you in your planning journey, you also likely want them to be there to help execute the plan when the time comes. So, what does that mean? It means you should be thinking about a team that also has their succession in mind as they age alongside you, so that if something happens to them, you won't be left with the gap at the time that the plan ultimately needs to be executed. Because the goal really is to ensure that all aspects of your estate plan are aligned and that you receive comprehensive advice tailored to your unique situation. So, on the parent side, you've just got to start and sit down and have that conversation with them to make sure that their affairs are organized to ease your burden vis-a-vis your parents. And on your own side, try to put together that team that can work with you and move forward with you and be there at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I think the transparency is just so important, right? And as you said, we've been at this for a long time, and you do see the difference between how estates get settled, and transparency is really crucial to a good outcome, really. And having those conversations early and really understanding your parents' wishes is so important. And absolutely agree with the dream team. And I have a couple of questions around that too. But before I go to those, talking to parents is one thing, but on your own estate plan, when should your own adult children be brought into the estate planning process, and how, and I guess when?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't think there is a one size fits all answer to that. And I'll start with perhaps the scenarios where conversations should really be had, And that would be in the scenario where parents are doing something out of the ordinary vis-a-vis their estate planning. So most parents come to me and the situation would be that their plan is going to be divide everything equally between all of their children when both parents have passed away. In that type of context, the expectations are going to be aligned in terms of what the kids are expecting to receive. And so when parents are thinking about doing something that is a little bit out of the ordinary, it's really, really, in my view, critical to engage in a conversation to manage the kids' expectations before the events unfold. There is nothing worse than being at the table after parents have passed away to explain to children an unequal distribution and why it was done. So if that's sort of the decision path that the parents are going down, I would strongly encourage them to have a meeting to discuss the reasons why. The other context where I think it's important to be very, very upfront about and to engage family members in the discussions is where you've got unique assets. For example, a family cottage or a family business. On the family cottage, I typically see two different types of clients. There is the one client who knows that the cottage really can only go to one child from an economic perspective, but they don't want to make that decision. They want to leave that decision to their children to be made. In that context, I strongly encourage the parents to actually have a family meeting to discuss that and to get the family's views about that, again, so there aren't any surprises at the end of the day. The other type of client is with a family cottage is the one that simply wants to leave it to all children equally, in essence, forcing them to be partners. And again, in that scenario, I would suggest and highly recommend a family meeting to engage with the next generation in terms of what their views are as to what should happen with the family cottage. When you get into some more complexity where there's family businesses involved, my view is to start the conversations early. There is the age question you've asked, Sarah. There's no real right age. I've got clients who bring their children into the fold about wealth and businesses at 18. I have others who aren't comfortable starting that conversation until their late 20s. And it really comes down to what is the family's views about wealth and sharing the quantum of wealth that the family may own, because parents are typically very concerned about not changing their children's life choices by sharing too much information about wealth in advance. But in my experience, it's better to start having those conversations sooner rather than later. And typically it's a family meeting. It doesn't have to be anything more complicated than sitting down and having family meetings. And if it's hard to get people together outside of family holidays, then use family holidays as an impetus to set aside time to have some discussions about estate planning.
Yeah, and I think our conversation is timely. It's summer, and it could be a wonderful time to have those family conversations or family meetings. And really, a lot of what the family meeting is about, especially where women can be engaged in this process, is around values and goals relating to their estate plan and what wealth means to the family and what goals they're reflecting through their will around that.
Well, I think that's an excellent point. And I know we haven't come to, the challenges, and we'll probably get to that. But one of the challenges is longevity, right? Women typically outlive men. And so it's going to be the mums and the grandmas of the world who are at the table longer than the dads and the grandpas. And so I think it does become more incumbent on women to be comfortable having these conversations because they will likely be the ones who are around to actually have to explain things from a practical perspective.
Yeah, women, whether we like it or not, are likely to be the primary financial decision makers at some point. So let's talk about those unique challenges that women face. Can you drill into some of the things that you've seen, maybe blind spots for women? Talk about some things that women should have top of mind as they think about their estate planning.
Well, one is longevity. So we've already referred to the fact that one of the challenges for women is the fact we all want to live longer, and we are in fact living longer, which means that women still are going to outlive men statistically. And with that comes a variety of challenges. But one in particular for women is that they may spend more years actually managing their finances independently, especially after a spouse has passed away. And that can be daunting because many women, and I would include myself in this bucket, are not involved in managing finances for a variety of reasons, whether that's the division of labor that exists within the couple's partnership, which is certainly my scenario. It's not because I'm any not smarter, not sophisticated enough. That's just the way it works in my relationship with my husband. But given that, and statistically, if things unfold the way the statistics say, he will pass before I will, and I will have to assume that burden in essence, because that's the way I look at it right now. And I'm anticipating it's going to be very overwhelming for me. And I think it's essential that if you're in a similar situation, that we start familiarizing ourselves with what that financial situation is. And I think that includes sitting down with the advisory team, meeting them in advance of when the event might unfold where you actually have to step in. So if you're not involved with Sarah on a day-to-day basis, actually sit down and arrange meetings with Sarah and any other advisors so that you know who the key players are. Take an active role in educating yourself, which is something that I am actually doing now. It's part of my practice as well, understanding how investments work, but with a more granular level. There's lots of great resources out there. And Sarah, I know your shop produces all sorts of different educational opportunities for your clients to dig in. Don't be afraid to ask questions. From a planning perspective, I really love clients that come with lots of questions, because if they have questions, it means they're trying to understand. And there's a better chance that they will actually put together and create a better plan if they actually understand the whys. And so you only get to understanding the whys if you actually understand the underlying assets and financial implications. Lastly, on this point, organize your financial documents. Again, in my practice, part of my practice is estate and trust administration. And over the years, I would describe clients as one of two types: people who are extremely organized and then people who are not organized. And there is nothing worse for family members left behind than have to figure out who the advisors are, where the assets are, who do they contact. And I think frankly, one of the greatest gifts people can leave their family members is being organized. So I would encourage you to create a list of who all your advisors are and their contacts. Even create a list of your passwords, because frankly, doing that can really help your family members not have to sort of hack into your systems after you're not here. And so get yourself organized.
Yeah, and I think that getting yourself organized also lends to make sure you have a seat at the table. So back to the dream team, get in touch with your trusted advisors, make sure you understand your numbers, your assets, all of the documents that you're talking about, and then go have that conversation with your estate planner. So now let's continue on with this conversation around the challenges that women face. Both you and I have quite a few clients that had almost the unexpected or tough situations arise, whether that's death of the spouse or divorce. And then many of our women clients also find themselves in the caregiver role. How does estate planning relate to some of those tougher situations or some of those scenarios?
Yeah, I think the role of the caregiver is one that continues to be a role that women assume. And we've all heard the sandwich generation, where you end up being the primary caregiver for children and then often the primary caregiver for aging parents, and often both at the same time, right? So there's lots of challenges that imposes from a planning perspective. One, Sarah, that I expect you see is women often are out of the workforce for a period of time, or they're the ones who step aside because they have these dual roles. It's the invisible labor, as we call it. And so that typically manifests itself in two ways. One, less wealth accumulation for women generally in their own name, but also a delay in prioritizing estate planning. And so the message here is you can't let that actually create the reason you don't pay attention to your own estate plan or the estate plan for your parents, to come back to the discussion we had a few minutes ago about starting that conversation. You may be looking after aging parents, but that doesn't mean that they're incapable. And so that would lead me to want to have a conversation with women who find themselves in this scenario, where making sure again that their parents' affairs are in order. And there are some tools that we typically look to where women find themselves in the scenario where they might actually be providing financial support for parents or for children. And so that leads to a conversation about trust. Trust might be a tool that women look to set up either during their lifetime or through their will. And trusts can be a means to make sure that the financial needs of women clients are looked after, but it can also be a way to actually provide for parents that you might be financially supporting before they pass away. And I'm seeing that more and more. In fact, one of the strategies we look to often is trying to set aside a trust structure that will mimic an annuity stream for parents that clients of ours are actually financially supporting to take away that burden from other family members. Obviously, wills and powers of attorney, again, I won't reiterate the comments I made earlier. The other document that I think becomes more critical for women moving forward with this dual role is letters of wishes. And we are seeing that more and more as a document that sits alongside trusts, wills, and powers of attorney. And really, what it is intended to do is to be an expression of wishes about care arrangements, for example, that clients, and we're talking about women clients, would want to see delivered to parents if the women aren't there, or in respect of their children. So we're using letters of wishes more and more to deal with a whole variety of things. It gives guidance to trustees about distributions, and it can deal with all sorts of other topics.
Does the letter of wishes also come into play when women are planning for their own aging and capacity?
Yeah, it does. I've recently drafted a letter of wish to sit alongside a power of attorney. And I know this is going to sound a bit odd, but really it focused on the level of personal care that this particular client wanted to make sure her attorney for property was going to fund in the event she became incapable. And it came from a personal experience. She had seen a scenario where a friend of hers became incapable, and the children who had the financial authority and the caremaking decisions stopped looking after things like regular hair appointments, regular aesthetic appointments. And that was really, really important to this particular client because it's what made her feel, in part, good about herself. And so we actually crafted a letter of wishes that had fairly detailed instructions to both her attorney for property and her attorney for personal care about how she wanted them to make decisions so that it wasn't black and white and it could be pointed to later.
Having grace is such an important aspect for so many women.
There's no reason not to do it.
And then in cases of divorce and second marriages, where there's often blended families, how do you deal with estate planning, powers of attorney around those types of situations?
Yeah, I mean, that is really one of the biggest challenges that we deal with. And it's quite common because it really does, when you deal with the blended families, you've got existing assets often for both spouses, you've got children from previous relationships, you've got differing financial goals. And you really need to step back and sort of think about how all of those different facts and objectives are going to work together. One of the primary concerns with second marriages is how do we ensure financial security of children from both previous relationships? We recognize biological children as children from a legal perspective, but we don't give recognition to stepchildren. And if you are in long term second or third marriages where there are stepchildren and you want to treat those stepchildren equal to your own biological, you need to make sure that you've expressly addressed that in your wills or any trust arrangements you set up. The other challenge we see is trying to provide for the proverbial second spouse in a way where the assets will ultimately revert back to the children of the first marriage. And that's where we see spousal trusts being employed a lot. And so the idea of a spousal trust is if my husband and I were to divorce and I've got assets, I would direct, and I get remarried, I would direct that my assets are held in trust for my second spouse to provide a stream of income for him. But ultimately, when he dies, the assets would revert back to my children from my first marriage. The challenge there is if my second spouse is close in age to my children may practically never actually get to inherit because they may not outlive my second spouse. So you need to think about what the age gap is between children of the first relationship and the second spouse. The other challenge is with spousal trusts is if the underlying asset is an operating business, you want to do what I call a run rate analysis. What does that mean? Well, how much cash flow does the spouse actually need to live moving forward? because you want to make sure then that there are directions built into the operating business to provide that cash flow up to the spousal trust so it gets paid out to the surviving spouse by way of income distributions. Because if you don't know what your run rate is, then if something happens to the family member who's actually the owner of the business, you could be in a conflict scenario with those people who are actually managing the business after your partner is gone. So I really encourage people to step back and do that run rate analysis. Lastly, our living arrangements. If you are with a second marriage and the house that you live in is owned by your spouse, you're going to want to make sure that it's very clear as to what the living arrangements are going to be in the event the owner spouse dies before you, particularly, again, vis-a-vis managing expectations as to what the children from the prior marriage are ultimately going to inherit and when they're going to inherit that.
Yeah, and living arrangements, can they also deal with the next generation and whether your kids now start living with other partners?
So are you thinking about custody arrangements, Sarah? Is that what you're referring to?
No, I'm thinking more about the family dynamics when the next generation enters into a partnership and you're worried about the legacy or the durability of that relationship.
That's a great point, Sarah. Parents are often concerned about what's going to happen with inherited assets in the event their children find themselves in a breakdown of their relationship. And so when we have clients that have adult children and there is some family wealth involved, inherited wealth or family trusts, we always raise the conversation about marriage contracts and cohabitation agreements. And the underlying premise of those contracts is to protect family wealth, whether it's going to be inherited or whether it's already gifted or whether there are family trusts in the mix.
So, Corina, there's so many more questions I could ask you. It's such an important topic. And as we talked about, especially relevant for women. But I think we should wrap up here for our listeners. Any last minute takeaways or nuggets before we close up?
If you haven't started the process, start. Gather your asset information. Reach out to Sarah to get some recommendations about your dream team. And just as Nike likes to say, just do it.
I think that's right. I think, as we said, it can seem very overwhelming, easy to procrastinate, but just get the discussion started. So thank you so much, Corina, for your insights and for sharing such thoughtful and practical advice. And if there is one thing we hope our listeners take away, it's really that estate planning isn't just about legal documents, right? It's about control. And really, I think what you said is creating clarity. And as you've just said, really just starting these conversations in order to protect what matters most to you. So for women in particular, as we talked about, who are often caregivers and stewards of the family wealth and ultimately are the primary financial decision making, it really is an essential part of managing their wealth. So to our listeners, thank you for joining us today. We hope today's conversation really sparks action. And don't hesitate to reach out to either Corina or I if you have any questions. So enjoy the summer, and we look forward to speaking to you again soon.
This podcast is produced solely for informational purposes and is not to be construed as an offer to sell or the solicitation of an offer to buy a security. The information herein is based on sources we believe to be reliable but is not guaranteed by us and does not purport to be a complete statement or summary of the available data. Any opinions expressed herein are statements of our judgment on the recording date and are subject to change without notice. Any unauthorized use or disclosure is prohibited. Receipt and/or review of this presentation constitutes your agreement not to reproduce, display, modify, distribute, transmit, or disclose to others the content, opinions, conclusions, or information contained in this podcast.